Welcome. I'm Lorilee Binstock, and this is a Trauma Survivors podcast. Thank you for joining us for a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast now on Mental Health News Radio Network. This podcast is also available wherever you get your podcasts, but I do suggest checking out Mental Health News Radio Network to find all your podcasts related to mental health. Today's guest is Cindy Benezra. Cindy is the author of Under the Orange Blossoms. She is a speaker, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and sexual abuse survivor and advocate who is passionate about bringing awareness to the impact of sexual trauma through meaningful conversations and system changing discussions. Cindy, thank you so much for joining me today.
So good to be here, Lorilee. Seriously.
Well,
I
I first want to start with, I would love it if you would be okay with sharing your personal story and how you got to this place of being this advocate.
so when I was younger, I was abused by my father from the age of 5 to 10
Mm,
and sexually abused. And my abuse looks slightly different than others. I mean, we all have our own story, and mine is my dad fondled me, but he kind of groomed me into that role. I didn't know what was truly happening until later on. And my dad focused more on pornography. He took pictures of me. And um, it's interesting. I find that a lot of people don't feel that pornography, child pornography, is a form of sexual abuse, but it is.
mm,
Um, it's definitely a form of child abuse, and it's kind of epidemic. It's all over now that we have the internet. It's all over the place, and that's usually how a lot of pedophiles or people find a lot of. mm, well, I guess you could say they're searching for. Uh, I don't even know how to. They're searching for what for children who are unclothed or are staged, and
mm,
I was one of those kids, and it took a lifetime. Seriously, I'm 60 now, and it has taken me a lifetime to go through all of that. It stopped at 10, and the reason why it stopped at 10 is because my dad was no longer attracted to me since I had developed early, and so then I was just of no interest to him at all. And he had abused other people in the neighborhood, sexually abused them too. So in definition, he really is a pedophile. Later on in life, when I was trying to find some resolution, I mean, I was still in my 50s trying to find resolution for my dad. I would ask him all the time, "Why did you do these things?"
mm,
Deny them. And when he started talking, and he was in his 80s, he admitted for the first time that he did do those things. And I started to interview him and do a lot of audio. And then I do have one footage, and it's on my YouTube channel. What he finds attractive in young children. And I said, you know what, Dad, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book about our life, and maybe somebody will find some healing in this form, maybe either some realization of maybe a mindset of a pedophile, or maybe it would be what I mean, it's my story, and we all go through our own stories, but it was my story of what I had gone through. And I found it interesting that a lot of people wish that their perpetrator would have apologized. And I think that was kind of like my greatest epiphany in this whole thing was, what does that apology look like, and what would we do with that apology? And that was in that process, I realized I never really got the apology. It wasn't what I wanted to hear. And that was the magic in the work through this whole process. And no matter how much therapy I had, I think I was waiting for an apology, and I never
mm,
got that. And then to come to terms that, okay, I didn't get the apology that I wanted to, and I didn't get those years back, and I didn't get I still had anger. And what I realize is that a lot of times we hold the key to our own grief and our own anger. And that was my greatest epiphany. Um, that it's a process in life if we want to hold on to what parts of our what parts of our grief do we want to hold on to and why, and when we let go, what is that the healing that we want to receive. But it took me years to figure this out.
Wow, it's interesting. I was also sexually abused by my father,
Mhm.
and I feel like it's a whole different situation because this is I want to ask, did you tell anybody, um,
I
about
did.
him?
I told close friends, but coming from survivor to survivor, when you do tell friends, it's you're always weighing, are they trustworthy? Will they keep my secret? Will they share with others? Will they shame me? Um, so I think it's always like you're just worried about that, and then you do it in different stages. And I even remember dating and thinking like, well, okay, so do I tell this person, what's their reaction going to be? And that was a really hard one for me too. So I did tell people along the way, but it wasn't like, I think it was always safe, and it never really came up until probably in my 50s when I sat around, I was on vacation with some girlfriends, and I said, we were all sharing something about ourselves. And I did share with them, but it wasn't like I made an announcement to a group of girls. And in that announcement, I said, I was sharing a little portion of my life. And that was when they said, "Oh my gosh, I never thought that you had ever gone through any trauma or you ever had anything hard in your life." And I was kind of blown away, like, oh my goodness, my life has been challenge after challenge after challenge, only when I could take on the challenges. So that was sort of like, I thought, gosh, that's just crazy how we could all put on different masks just to go through life, and
Mhm,
how um, we just don't really sometimes see each other and why we react certain ways, or certain triggers will hit. And I'll tell a friend and go, okay, this kind of stuff just freaks me out. So I just got to share with you. This happened to me in my past. So I got to tell you, if I ever become this way, will you just like hold on to me or just stand here? Don't leave me, that kind of thing. So
mhm.
it was just, yeah, just crazy process. And that wasn't until later on. And that's part of the reason I do this is because I realize people go, "Oh, well, like, what does somebody look like who's gone through any form of abuse? What do we look like?" I remember asking my kids, "What does a pedophile look like?" Or "What does somebody who sexually molests other people?" And my kids were like, "They live under a bridge." I mean, my kids are in their 30s now, but they were in their 20s. They live under a bridge, they're home.
Mm.
No, honey, and that's kinda like in the process, I'm sort of like, "Well, it's your grandfather." And that really blew them, like, "Oh my goodness." I go, "They look like anybody."
How
And
old were your kids when you
um
Yeah.
I have to say they were all different ages. So, I had one daughter. So I have 4 kids. One daughter, she was 14 because she kept on insisting, "Why won't I have her grandfather over, and why can't she go into the bedroom with her grandfather to show her, I don't know, some toy or something?"
Mhm.
She kept on asking over and over again, and I thought, "Okay, I have to tell her." So, and then after that, I think it was trying to help her find boundaries with her grandfather. So when he would come over, I would only have him sit at the dinner table, and we would have a meal together, and he was allowed to go to the bathroom. And I know people say, "Well, why would you even do that?" But for me, it was really important. I couldn't, it was harder for me to cut him out of my life and pretend that he didn't exist than I just couldn't do that. For some reason, it was just too much work for me. So I did what was right for me.
Right.
And my other daughter, she was in her 20s. I just felt that she wasn't able to emotionally, I think it was just overwhelming for her. So I had to wait into her 20s and I really had to work through it. And it's interesting, she's a therapist now. And
Mm.
my son, I have a special needs son. And I found it interesting when I told him, what had happened to me and all the cause and effect of what happened from that time all the way into adulthood with friendships and um, learning disabilities. I had suicide ideation. I contemplated suicide. So when I shared a lot of this with him, and he has special needs, he goes, "Wow, mom, I relate to you so much more because I really thought that your life was just like perfect. But now I recognize that you struggled and struggle just as much as me, and I've never felt closer to you." So then I just,
Oh.
wow. And then my oldest son, he still can't talk to me to this day, and he about this. And it's interesting, he's a politician and he still can't talk about this. He knows
Mm.
about it, but he just can't talk about it. So I just find it oh, I just find it fascinating that, when you do share with your children, or if you choose to, that it is something that you probably have to take into consideration, like where they are emotionally and how they could process information. And I think only a parent would know that. I think
Mhm.
you have to kind of guide that. And that's even if you really want to, or even have the person in your life.
Wow, how was your relationship with your dad after the abuse?
We were always, I used to say this to friends because they would ask, like, how come you're not close to your dad? That's always the hard part, too.
Mhm.
Have abuse, like, how come you're not close to your dad? I would always say, well, we're, oh gosh, what was it? Oil and vinegar, we're fire and butane, but we really
Mhm.
were. So I wasn't lying. Or I would just say, we just have a strange relationship and I don't really care for the person who he is. And when they would meet him, they would kind of go, yeah, he is kind of weird. But, that's just a friend being a
Mhm.
friend and just kind of like standing up for you and sticking, kind of like hearing you. But that's what I would say, because it was the truth. And not until later on in life when he was real and honest, could I even have true conversations with him. And I felt that he really put himself out because he hid it his whole life and didn't want anybody to know, but he felt that it was time to talk about it. And
Mm.
I don't know. My son said that maybe he knew he was going to pass, that he was trying to find some retribution. That's the way my son looked at it. My daughter, the one that I work with, she was like, well, maybe he saw how important it was finally to you at the end that you needed some resolution before he goes. And I thought, well, that's a different way to look at it too. So who knows what the real answer is or where he was going. But I think he struggled in sharing a lot of his truth. And when I heard it and as I was interviewing, I have to say most of the time I wanted to vomit. Like I felt
Mm.
really ill in hearing his truth, um, what he was attracted to, why he thought that way. And I realized like how mentally ill, how disturbed he was. And just being human, I felt like how trapped he was in the mindset of a pedophile, but like
Wow.
disgusted, like just disgusted. And it didn't make it better for me. It still doesn't make it better for me. It doesn't make it right. Um, I think that's what also I realized about the process of forgiveness for yourself when you go through this. It didn't take away my shame. And that was a big process where I just thought, like, how do I work on giving him this shame? This is not mine to own. How do I work on giving him the shame, where he owns that? And I talked to him a little bit about that. I said, I don't know why I'm holding your shame. I mean, this is not what I need to do. And so I think that was sort of like an empowerment movement in myself and kind of like in my soul like taking back ownership of self a little bit.
Wow. I was at a conference a couple weeks ago and I talked about this a little bit in a previous podcast, but this person who was on my panel said, look at your parents as your grandparents' children and see it's how they're raised and what happened to them and how that kind of got passed down. For me, I actually did I did a MDMA assisted therapy where which I thought was where my breakthrough happened, where I was able to see my father as a child I'm Filipino, and I saw him in the Philippines as a child, and he was abused by his by his father. And so when I saw that, I that 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 anger lifted and I was able to be more compassionate. Like, oh my gosh, this happened to you. You didn't know any better. Because for the longest time, I was like, he knew better. He had to have known better. He told me not to tell anybody, right? Um, but when I realized, like, when I saw that, like that was where his mind was. Like you're saying, your father's mind was trapped in the head and like the mindset of a pedophile. I wonder if he told you what had happened to him. Did he ever say anything?
He did. So he was born and raised during the war and in Germany, and he was raped by soldiers
Mm,
as a child. He didn't really go into great length about it. It was very confusing. He would have like sometimes I felt like he was playing with my emotions because I am a compassionate person.
mm,
So I felt like he was telling me things. I had never really knew where his truths were because he does have a mindset of of mm, of manipulating and
yeah.
narcissist. So it's I've always used caution. So it's I never really knew what the exact truth was. So I took everything with a grain of salt. But I did hear it and I thought, well, that's horrible and that's unfortunate. Um, but let me just say it this way, and this is how I told my dad. I said, "Okay, dad, so look, like this happened to me. Would I do this and give this to my child? Like this was horrible. It like shaped my world. Would I choose to do this to my children? Absolutely not, because I know it was horrible. So why would you choose to do this to me?" And he didn't really have he's this is the twisted part. He didn't really have a true answer for that. He goes, "Well, that is just the way of the world. That is just what happens. That is just part of how you raise children." And I just thought, "Oh my God,
Yeah.
just," and he has to rationalize his reality to make him feel better. And I did tell him that. And then he would pause and he would listen. But I said, "That's how you could sleep at night because you've rationalized your truth." And I said, "Well, I said, I'm a truth seeker and I could never rationalize and cause pain to somebody else. And I also feel that cycles have to be broken.
Hmm.
Otherwise, I don't know. I feel like I don't know how often this has happened in our family. I haven't heard any stories, but I do believe that cycle should be broken. And we are in an age now that we have resources where, like you and I, could communicate right now, and
Yeah.
hopefully we could break these cycles. And I think when you talk about these things and just any part of it, I feel every time I do, I feel that cellularly there's a change in our bodies that we could heal, and it's not just what we say verbally. It's really like in the structure of our body, and it's that book, um uh oh gosh, see, the
The body,
body.
The body keeps the score?
It keeps the score, exactly. And when I read that, I thought, yes, because I would almost feel it like every single time if I would have an epiphany, it was like, oh, aha. And I felt like it was one more step close to my empowerment or getting back what I thought that I lost, but it was a different kind of feeling and just being rooted in my body. It was something that I couldn't even articulate. It was just different in myself.
Wow. From when the abuse happened, and a lot of people go through PTSD and certain symptoms where they medicate, they self-medicate. There's something that, like I believe it or not, and it's very weird to say, it's that, you know, I I mean, I really just went down a rabbit hole of just, like, bad behavior, and my parents would always say, my mom would be like, "Oh, you're just a bad teenager, you're a bad kid," and I thought I was, kept telling me this, but I realized 20 years later that it was all a symptom of the abuse. And, I was promiscuous, I did drugs, and I drank, and I did all these things, and I didn't realize that until just recently, right? Like 3 years ago. Um, what was it like for you? What was the impact of this abuse for you?
Um, so crazy, and I know a lot of people have experienced this too. It's called dissociation. And
Mm,
so I had this happen to me, and so at 10, then I went through puberty, and um it was like my mind shut down, and I didn't recall one thing that had happened to me. All I know is I didn't like my dad. And
mm,
so from 10 all the way to 16, when I was just started like, "Ooh, boys are kind of cute." And I started having my first sexual encounter like at six, it was close to 17, 16, 17 there. Um, until after that, did I go through a complete flashback. It was like my
oh,
brain opened up and I started having horrific, horrific nightmares. And it was like I was experiencing them all, but I didn't understand why I was dreaming about these things. And it was so vivid. I would wake up completely in a sweat. I would scream. And every night, I mean, I didn't want to sleep alone. So they were night terrors. And I lived in a foreign country. I happened to live in Spain at the time. So we didn't I mean, I didn't speak Spanish. There wasn't a local library. I mean, the internet didn't exist way back in that day. So I didn't really have anybody to consult or talk to. And when I talked to about this, my mom, like I'm having these nightmares, she seemed concerned, but she never really dug deep into it.
mhm,
And, I would like, sometimes I'm like, "Please, mom, can I sleep with you because I'm just having these nightmares," and it went on. So, but basically, I started journaling and writing down these dreams because they were just haunting, and every time I have a dream, I just get up and then I'd write, and when I had I looked through everything, I could put the piece times together, kinda going like it was like, a shattered window or a mirror, and it had been broken in 1,000 different pieces. And through this journaling, I was able to put my timeline like of what happened to me as a kid. And when I recognized that it was me, because I used to think like, this cannot be me. This is just too horrific. Because my dad was physically abusive, emotionally abusive. I mean, he was very, very manipulative. And when I put this all together, I realized it was my life. And when I realized this, I talked to my mom, my dad, and I said, "Hey, dad, did you ever?" And I said, "touch," because I didn't even know the right word to say. It just felt creepy. I said, "Did you ever
mm,
touch me?" And he's like, "No, why would you even say that?" And oh my gosh, like, what's going on with you? And why would you do this? And then the other thing was like, maybe you read it in a book, maybe you saw it in a movie, and I thought, "Oh, deflection." I mean, I could see this all now, and then it was, "Are you okay? Are you" like I was crazy or something, and I remember looking across the table at his big blue eyes and thinking, "Oh my gosh, you are lying, this is the truth. This is the truth." And then I went to my mom, and my mom was like, "Oh my goodness, why would you start this up? Why would you start talking about these things?" And I thought, what is my mom hiding? And she was like, "Everything's going so well in my relationship with your dad. Why are you going on?" I just thought, "Oh my gosh, what is going on?" And in that, I fell into the deepest, deepest depression where I would come home every day from school. And I lived in Spain. And so it's a little bit different there. But I would sit outside my windowsill and think about jumping every day and
Mm,
what were the
gosh.
pros and cons of life, like why, like I couldn't deal with this horrible dirty secret, and I couldn't have taken enough showers or baths to get the smell off of my body, or the just my mind felt heavy. And in that process I really thought about taking my own life. And when I look back at that time, I think, like, thank God, because I would have missed out on so much life, um, about trying to figure out, like, should I stay or should I go? Like, what is the beautiful parts of life? Because I could find nothing. I hated everything about myself, and I hated my life. It was just overwhelming. And from there at 16, it became a healing process. Like, how do I find love for myself? How do I like myself again? And how do I? So I kind of turned to drugs and alcohol, but mine was a story of, like, how do I find myself back into this world?
Mm,
And I
wow.
think I worked on every day because I didn't have the tools to go to a library. Like, how do I stay present in my body every day and want to get up the next day? And I think that's what became almost slightly obsessive. Like, how do I do this? Like, how do I find and look at the sky again? When is it blue? Like, I could not even relate to the color blue, or I could not relate to anything beautiful. I remember trying to focus one thing about my face that I liked, and I remember I liked my front teeth and my eyebrows. But I'm 16, and I was really trying to hang on to finding something beautiful about myself because I loathed myself. I mean, anybody who wants to take their life really is trapped.
That's it.
There's no other way. They're just trapped. And until you find a way through that, sometimes it's just minute by minute or day by day.
Wow. Yes, I do think that that trapped is the word I used when I felt very suicidal, was I felt like there was nowhere else to go except to take my own life. And that is a really hard thing, but the fact that you were able to even recognize that you needed to find yourself and that you needed to figure out what it is that you loved about yourself, like, I'm still working on that. But at this age of 16, the fact that you were working on that, that blows my mind that you had that self-awareness and that mindfulness to know that that's what you needed to get you through.
Well, it's not like I didn't have a few drinks here and there.
Yeah.
I definitely so Spain doesn't have a drinking, age. You could drink, it doesn't really matter, but I realized that just made me feel worse. So,
Mhm.
and that wasn't the way, and I just felt like if I did something for my body, um, that felt better. So it was like, "Do you have a drink?" That didn't make me feel better. It just made me feel sadder. And if I walked or if I ran, then that made me feel better. So I think it was, and I didn't have any influences around me. I didn't see anything. So it was just going by my intuition. I I just I just kind of cut everybody out and was just going by my intuition. So I that's sort of why I'm kind of a firm believer that we have these tools inside of ourselves. If we really do a lot of deep soul searching, we have uh, and they're not fancy memberships to go someplace. I mean, they're really like we're born with these tools to
Mhm.
help ourselves. Either it's a lot of work, and either we do it in stages, and if we choose to do that, yeah.
Yeah, that's I absolutely believe it. Some people like myself, I needed a little bit more help in finding those tools with it, but once I did, it was like the sky's the limit on my healing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm yeah, I'm curious. You said that you thought your mom knew something. Did
Mhm.
she?
So so at the age of, hold on, it was 7 when I told my mom, 7, 8, I told my mom, I said, "Dad comes into my room and touches me." And, oh, okay, I'm gonna start all over.
Mhm.
So, I was 7, 8, and my dad took a photo of me. It was me naked under the Christmas tree on a fur rug, like, like a pinup girl, and had presents around me, and I was posing in different things. And my dad was so thrilled with this. I liked doing the pictures um, instead of all the other sexual stuff that my dad wanted me to do because I found it just to be easier. It was just like, if it was anything kinda, like, sexual with my father, it was always based on fear. This was just smiling, not smiling, posing, that kind of thing, and it didn't involve anything with it just didn't feel dirty, I guess you could say, and my dad used different words, it was all manipulation, but he did say, "This is going to be our Christmas card." I took it for face value.
Mhm.
Okay. Our family Christmas, I mean, it tells you how naive I am. Um,
Wow.
so I'm like, "Oh, this is gonna be our family Christmas picture. Okay, cool." I'm 7 years old, and, told my mom, that this happened to me, that dad was coming into my room and touching me, and I said, "Oh, and look, mom," well, she was asking more questions, and then I said, "Well, he takes pictures of me." And then I went and showed her the picture of me underneath the Christmas tree, and she looked like she had seen a ghost, and she's like, "Are there more of these?" And then I pulled out this big box and showed her all these pictures of me, and, um, I think that's when I told my mom. My mom, left my dad. She left him several times. They usually say it takes 4 times to leave an abuser, but, it wasn't that happened did not happen on the 4th time when I showed her this, and we went to a kind of like a women's shelter, and even at that
Mm.
70s, there wasn't a women's shelter, there was just a shelter that happened to have more women in it, and so we went into they didn't even have a sex kit then, and, what happened is that, since they didn't have a sex kit, I had bruises, I didn't have broken bones, I had my hymen intact. Um, so they put me back into the home, and my dad said that he would never do it again to my mother, so my mother moved back. And it's also part of our culture. A lot of times these things happen a little bit more in certain cultures.
Yeah.
So it was my mom went back and she believed my father, and she also felt that she couldn't work and hold a job and that he was a good man, is what she would say. And I mean, he did treat her fairly well. I mean, what she valued was having a roof over her head, and uh, that he treated us well, but that was to her what she saw. But I remember saying as a kid, "Mom, I would live on the streets. I would take my kids out. I would take my kids out of this. I would never even up with this.
Wow.
You could find a job. You're so much better than him. You're gorgeous. You could marry anybody. You don't have to even marry anybody. You could do anything." And I remember thinking that. And then when she would go back time and time again, it was just the most disappointing thing as a kid. And I'm sure that impacted me in some ways too, where I just thought, you know what? I would never do this to my kids. I would I would just never do this to my kids. But it was a conversation I had later on with my mom, and it took a lot to get over it. And I don't think she really saw what I was really going through as a kid. And I realized that my mom had been sexually abused too. So,
Mm.
a
Yeah.
lot of these cycles, and we rationalize a lot of the behavior, and so I understood her a little bit more, but it doesn't make it right. And
Right.
I'm telling her that, and I'm sure that was very hurtful for her to hear. It doesn't make it right. Yeah.
Wow. Well, you are quite the cycle breaker. That seems like a lot where that you just stopped right at you. Like there's nothing coming from your dad's side of the family and your mom's side where you're like, this is not how it's going to be with my children. And so that is such a brave step. And I don't think a lot of people understand how difficult that is. You have to do a lot of relearning.
Oh gosh. Well, it's not only the relearning, I think it's the cycles in the family, because when you do share something like this, that this happened in my family, it's not like you just get out and go, hey, mom abused me,
Right.
everybody, yeah, I told you. Now let's go on with life. I mean, it is like a nuclear explosion in families. And those that I mean, what do you do? Like, I remember my mom saying, I know it sounds crazy. What are we going to do for the holidays? I was like, oh man, like I'm in a different, I'm like, really? That's where you're at? And I was, oh wow. Like, what's the family gonna say? We're a good family. And I just remember thinking, like, okay, these are the consequences. And what about siblings? How do they, it might have happened to them. And you're also telling, this is your story, and you have to keep it to your story. And how do you
Mm,
keep that sibling out? And I just realized it was way more complicated with the family. And a lot of times I hear that people get alienated from their families because they did break a secret. They did break, what stays in the household, or what happens behind these walls stays here. So that is, to me, I found that to be in some ways more difficult, because I wasn't just dealing with myself, I was dealing with lots of other family members. And if you have a culturally tight family where there's aunts and uncles and cousins, then that's the challenge. And I think often that's what keeps us quiet, is because of that dynamic.
yeah, I do think that incestuous sexual abuse can feel more damaging because, like you said, we have to there's a secret that the family just wants to keep within themselves. I think if someone else came in, like, I'm pretty sure 95%, I think that's between 90 to 95% of people who are abused are sexually abused by someone they know.
Mm.
And then but, then there's and I think we don't realize how prevalent it is because, like you said earlier, when you ask your children, "What do you think a pedophile looks like?" And they were like, "Oh, it's a person under the bridge. It's someone who's just living on the street," and that is quite the opposite, and I think we need to really bring that conversation, you know, to the forefront. Like, no, it is the people around us, and so we need to be more vigilant, and we need to stop forcing children from hugging their, like, I know growing up it was like hug your uncle, hug your aunt, and it was like now they're telling you no, like let your child make that decision for themselves. And so that's something that I think people are just we're just trying to grasp and work on now.
Right. I think, that was something I even did, when I look back at my kids, I would say, oh, hug your grandfather. And I was just thinking, like, how creepy is that, just knowing where I came from. And then later on, I would just say, well, say goodbye, say goodbye, like, like normal responses. And I thought, oh, they don't have to hug him if they don't want to. And I would just say goodbye, that's normal. You say goodbye, hello, and goodbye to people. So
Mhm.
um, I think it is just different ways of parenting now. And it's just something that we have to be aware of, in this generation. They're probably listening to this thinking, like, of course, you guys, like, of course, why would you force your children to hug somebody? But it's also too, I think, in the Hispanic culture, you always show respect for your family and you hug. And there's a
Mm.
lot of physical touch in there too. So how do you keep that? those boundaries, and then respect yourself and respect, your children, show your children, like, if you don't want to, then you don't have to, but
Right.
yeah.
Well, Cindy, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Oh my goodness, Lorlilee, I could talk about this for, like, a week
I
on end.
know. I do enjoy talking to you. I would really, I feel like this episode could go on for hours with everything, just my personal like curiosity and interest in, oh my gosh, that happened to me too, but how did you respond? I feel like we could do this, and and I appreciate all the information that you're providing to this audience, because I think it's powerful. But I do want to know, like, is there anything that you feel like this audience needs to know, um, to help themselves, to help everyone else, to break down any type of stigma, anything?
Well, share this episode, but I do want to say to those who have walked a similar path as we have, that there is hope. And I really do know this, that if you are searching for healing, that it takes time. There's no magic wand or bullet. That it's a time thing. And even if you go to two therapists, it it's your mind and your body could only handle so much in certain stages. So be kind to yourself and recognize that it's a process. And if it takes, years and years, just hang on, because there is more beauty and more freedom into coming and growing through this process at the end. So hang in there. And there's lots of people who have gone through and find healthy relationships and find themselves all over again. And actually, in some ways, I've come out richer and fuller, in emotion, and digging so deep. Um, so there is, light at the end of the tunnel.
Wow. Yes, there is. And thank you so much, Cindy. I really appreciate you joining me and sharing your story, because I feel like it's an important story to tell. Because, every time I've told my story, a lot of people have come out and said, that something similar has happened. And so now I feel comfortable talking to my therapist about it, when they went through therapy for so long without even talking about what had actually happened. And so it's stories like yours that help other people get the healing that they need.
Thank you. And the same with you. If you ever feel like reaching out, I'm here. I'm at www.cindytalks.com. I have a blog. I would love to hear from you. I have also my book coming out in Spanish. It's in English too, and that's Under the Orange Blossoms. But I'm also on Instagram and the social media. But really, what I care about is you, and letting you know that you are not alone. And as Lorilee, she's like the most beautiful example of how how survivors do come out, and we live beautiful lives, and you will too.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. That was Cindy Benesra, author of Under the Orange Blossoms. For more information on Cindy and to purchase her book, check out the show notes. January's issue of Authentic Insider is out. Check out Authentic Insider at traumasurvivorthriver.com. That's traumasurvivorthriver.com. And you can also check out past episodes of A Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my email list to get Authentic Insider in your inbox monthly. We will be back next week when I speak with Dr. Victoria Johnson, when we discuss how she survived abuse, became a trophy wife, to then become a surgeon. You've been listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. I'm Lorilee Binstock. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Take care. But there are a lot of people who I've spoken with who just hate the idea of forgiveness. Like, why would I forgive my perpetrator? And like you said, like, that would just be giving them that, like, letting it go. Um, do you think, is that how you still feel about what's been going on?
I think forgiveness, just the word itself, for somebody who's been sexually abused is a different it forgiveness is its own kind of complete category, I feel. Um,
Mm.
but when somebody has done incredible harm to you physically and mentally, it's a for me, it feels different, and when it becomes somebody that you trusted, there's a traitor, there's something like, "You betrayed me." It's something completely different. It feels different than if it was, like somebody hit me in a car, that kind of a thing. This is somebody that I loved, knew, trusted, and that had broken and taken things from me, and there feels so many different levels of something being taken away. And so when the idea comes up about forgiving, I have to say, through my whole life, I thought I would never, ever forgive my father because it just wasn't. And I felt that if I did forgive my father, especially as a teenager, because I was kind of spicy, um, I felt that I was betraying other people who had survived. So I felt like I was a traitor to these unknown people that I had moved on or healed. And so I felt like I had to carry this banner, this torch, that I was going to hold up this anger for all these survivors that I didn't even know, just because that's the way I'm wired. And as I was getting older and going through the process, I realized that forgiveness was about me, about my own forgiveness of myself. And I thought like I had a lot of issues about like, did I cause this? Did I create this? Was
Mm.
or did it something that I say? Am I a weak person? And I carried a lot of that. And so I had to forgive myself about that. And in that, so it was like in layers of forgiveness. And when it came to actually talking to my father, and not everybody is given that opportunity to talk to their perpetrator, I realized that I didn't get a chance to hear the right forgiveness that I wanted to hear. And that it was, I had to be more forgiving of myself. And in that process, um, it was forgiveness for me was letting go of the anger and regaining empowerment in myself. But do I forgive what he did? No. And that still is forgiving. That's my own personal boundary. I forgive, like, this happened, but was it right? No, I do not forgive that. No, I will, I just can't. I just, there's certain things that are right or wrong. And so no, I don't forgive the act of what he did, but in
Yeah.
the process, I've learned to let go. And forgiveness, in my definition, is a letting go. And if you could let go of that intense anger, then that's, for me, a process of forgiveness. And you could be angry as hell as you're going through this forgiveness process, off and on, hot and cold, but it's intense. I think it's a very intense process.
Yeah, I think that was the hardest thing. I also felt this need to always to just be angry, and I realized that that was only hurting myself, that I was carrying that anger could be explosive at times, and it wasn't until in my journey and finding that compassion for my father's own inner child and his himself, I realized, like, that the forgiveness was for myself. Like you said, like, I needed to forgive myself for taking on his trauma, and that was really hard. And, I have gotten messages from people who are like, "Forgiveness, never. I would never." And so I understand what your thoughts are about, people feeling betrayed or by you if you were to completely forgive your father. because I have had people reach out to me like, I don't really believe in this idea of forgiveness. So and I felt like I had to reframe it. It wasn't that I forgave him for what he did, but I forgave myself for carrying his trauma that was not mine, and my issues, and what he did was not on me. And I think that took a lot. Like you said, that's really hard work. And I think there is a lot of courage in that, because that is really hard, especially when you are carrying the hope of healing for so many people that you don't even know, right? And so I think that that's very brave of you to be able to talk a lot about that, because it is hard. Forgiveness is hard.
Forgiveness is hard too, and I think it's like, there's so many, layers to this. Like, I just feel like it's such a different, um, feeling when I think about sexual abuse, just because of the different levels of betrayal and hurt and pain that are associated with this, versus like if you get, I don't know, hit or stabbed by somebody else, you don't even know that person. You're like, okay, what I mean? It's a different step. At least I don't know. I've never had that experience, but this is how I feel about it when I've really, really thought through it. Um, yeah. And there's so much anger in that. Um, Also, I think if you have a child too, if you are a parent, then you look at that like, how could you? And then it just makes you even more mad.
Right,
Um,
right. Yeah, for me, I feel like the cycle that started to continue was my anger. I think once my anger towards my dad, because it was like, right, I felt that there was this anger of I can't control, like I've lost all control. And I think when in parenting my children, of course you don't have all the control when your kids are, driving you mad. Um and I would be very explosive. Like I yelled a lot. I was very, very angry, but it was once I was able to let go of the anger for my dad, um, I began responding to my children versus reacting to them. And so that was where I felt like that cycle needed to just fall away. And it did, and it's helping. And my daughter was older than my son. My daughter was 5 when I went into treatment, and my son was 2. And so she still has a little bit of um my explosive behavior, and because she saw that in me. My son, on the other hand, he got to see a lot of his life. He saw me healing. And
right.
so he can regulate his nervous system. He can, he's seen me be, apologetic when I've been explosive. And he has a lot of empathy and compassion. And so healing really does get passed down. And so if you are whether it's abuse by someone else, abuse within the family, any type of trauma, I think the healing you do within yourself is going to carry on. And if you don't get the healing, most likely there's some part of that will get carried passed down through generations. And so um
I agree with that. I have a videotape. Um, it's on YouTube too, with my daughter, and anyway, it's like, what did she take from this? And I thought it was really interesting. I just asked them randomly, like, what do you take from this? Like, what's your big takeaway from having being having a mother who's been abused? What's your big takeaway? And her big takeaway was, um, that no matter what life brings you, that she's had a role model to let go, to think about it and then let go, and that whatever it is, that you'll get through it. And she was saying it was the way you it's about more about the process of going through it and how you carry yourself and going through it. And
mhm.
She always talks about that. She goes, "I learned that from you, mom. Like, I just learned
Oh,
a lot." And when I hear things like that, I just kind of go, "Oh my gosh, okay, maybe I made this horrible wrong, a right." And I look at my daughter it reflects in her relationship, and now she's pregnant, and maybe it'll reflect in the way she carries her kids. So that is one of the beautiful parts about taking the time to soul search and figure out healing, because it does have ripple effects, and
mhm.
when you do that, it has positive ripple effects for the generations to come.
Wow. Yes, that's so beautiful. It is. Healing is worth it. Post-traumatic growth is real.
So
I didn't think it was for like 25 years of my life, but no, 35 years of my life. And yeah, I know I'm a believer. I'm a believer, and I want everyone to know that it's possible.
definitely.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And please feel free to email me if there's anything else. I'd love to share your YouTube channel in the show notes. And I know I have cindytalks.com, right? Yes, and if there's anything else you want me to add within the show notes, I would love to put it in there so people can, um um, get more information on you and search you and check your stuff out.
Okay, I'd love that. Thank you.
Well, it was such a pleasure. I feel like I was just chatting with you. It was so nice.
Same here. It's like sister to sister.
Mm.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, take care and let me know if you need anything and if you're in the DC area, Washington, DC. So,
Okay, I would love that.
yeah.
And honestly, so we just came up, I was just talking about, I would love to interview you if that's okay,
Oh,
about a
absolutely.
survivor. So just kind of role reversing a little bit, and just talking to a survivor. And I was just telling my team this morning, I was like, okay, I think I have the person. I haven't met her, but I just get a good feeling about. And that was
Oh.
so I
Oh,
love it.
I love it. Well, yes, I'm more than happy to. Any chance I get to talk to you, because I really feel like I'm learning a lot from you and just
I'm learning a lot from you. I love to hear like your intake, and you're so intuitively like on it, and you've got like good depth, and I love that. Yeah, so you're great.
oh,
Seriously.
oh, well, thank you, and I appreciate you. And yes, let's keep in touch. Let me know when you'd like to talk, when you'd like to chat. I'm available. I think you have my phone number too, so feel free to text as well. I think it's in the email.
Okay. Sounds great. Well, Merry
Awesome.
Christmas to you and your
Yeah,
family.
Merry Christmas to you. Take care.
Thanks, honey. You
Thank
too.
you. Bye.